Y'all, welcome back to Kentucky Fried Wargaming, where two guys who aren't qualified to talk about anything decide to talk about a game with hard math and chance. I'm Joe.
And I'm John.
And this week, we're hopping into an episode topic that is a direct piggyback off of last week's topic. It's an idea that's kind of been kicking around in John and I's head for a little while now, and it's a two-sided coin of a topic, if you will. And last week we covered the first side, now we're covering the second. John, what exactly was last week's episode, and how are we going to flip it on its head this time?
So last week we talked about how to handle having like a bottom tier or a weaker powered army. Mm-hmm. And this week we're going to talk more about having the opposite side of that spectrum. What happens when you have a very powerful army or a top tier army, and how that affects like your play with your local group, some things you can do about it, how to recognize it is, those kinds of things.
Yeah, and I feel like it seems like, probably for people who are newer in the hobby, it would seem like a topic that's not worth talking about. Because if you have a background in like video games or RTSs or MOBAs or whatever you're into, the idea of having something that is super, super, super powerful, like your faction being super, super good, is probably incredible. You know, it sounds like all gravy and everything's golden. But it's a little different here in this hobby. It can come with some difficulties that you probably aren't used to if you're new to sort of the social gaming environment or sphere. So I think it's worth talking about a little bit. But before we dive too much into that, we're going to keep going with the segment that we were asked to put in by one of the viewers. We're going to talk about hobby time and games played. John, you want to go first? What have you been up to?
Yeah, so I've been working with our Twitter and following a couple different miniature painters, and there's this one guy who's been working on a lot of Beasts of Chaos, and I keep seeing Beasts of Chaos coming across my feed. And you, the listeners, probably don't know this. I have a bunch of Beasts of Chaos sitting in my closet that I haven't messed with in a long time, mostly because their book's kind of like in a bad place.
Yeah, it was in the last week episode territory for sure.
Yeah, and like doing last week's episode kind of got me thinking about it again. Was like, man, I really like those little goat dudes. I might pull those out and start painting them. So I've started like pulling my stuff out, taking a look at it, see what's done, what's not done, and then I'm going to start working on the Beast of Chaos since my Skaven are mostly caught up, but I don't feel like buying a whole bunch of new models right now. So I'm going to be working on that. Going to be working on Tau more, probably pick up like one or two kits maybe. And then also have spent a lot of time researching new games. Really researching Infinity.
Oh, God, yeah. He got me hooked on the bug. I've also been digging into it, you metal mini-pedaling bastard.
Yeah, and so I've pretty much landed on playing Oceania. Kind of get into that, see how it works. Probably paint them up like Vaporwave and fancy. Yeah, and if you guys have any suggestions for other miniatures games, go ahead and send them to us, tweet them at us, that kind of stuff, because we're looking at wanting to dive into games that aren't Warhammer. Everyone knows about Warhammer, but we want to dive into other stuff, and if you're interested in like learning about those games, we can make episodes about them if that's something you're into. What about you? What are you working on, Joe?
Well, I've also been doing a little bit of research into Infinity because John has peddled it to me. And I was kind of like holding off. So I was able to hold it back. Like, I saw a bunch of great reviews. It's like, I don't need to play it. And then I asked a question to the community, and they were super responsive and nice. And I was like, I don't need to play it. And then John went, hey, Joe, how do you like robot cyberpunk samurais? And I was like, oh, lordy, I like them a lot. But I'm holding out.
I know your type.
And then he sent me a link, and he's like, all right, you need to check out this Ariadne thing, because they are essentially Russian space rednecks with werewolves and machine guns. And by fucking God, got me. You got me. You had me at, like, crazy Russian redneck space werewolves. I'm done. I'm in. Whatever that is from here until the end of time, I'm in. So I've also been doing a little research on Infinity. It's a dense game to get into. Like, I thought 40k was bad. I was wrong.
Yes.
But I'm trying to slowly wrap my mind around those rules. For games played, I also, as I mentioned in, I think it was the last podcast, the one before, I've been running a Werewolf the Apocalypse game for some friends during the quarantine online. They had told me that, they'd never played Werewolf before, and it's my favorite setting of all time. So I felt obliged to run it for them, and it's been going really great. They seem to like it a whole lot, and it seems like the story I'm telling is working for them. And actually, they begged me to go from one game every other week to one game per week because they didn't want to keep waiting in between games. So that's a good sign, and it's a time like that during quarantine that I can accommodate it. So that was cool.
It's always good to hear, like, as a DM or storyteller, man, I like your stuff so much, I want to do more of it. Can I have more, please?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I feel like during quarantine, my creative juices have been falling. So I've been DMing games for over a decade. So it was really weird when I went to run this one that I was kind of nervous. Like, I shouldn't be, like, I know this system like the back of my hand. I know all the lore and stuff. I could write story forever, but I was nervous, largely because, like, you worry if you lost the creative knack.
It's also difficult for people like you and me, where we've both done tactile running. Like, we haven't done online running of games for the most part. I've done one Monster of the Week game, and it didn't last very long. And you're just now doing Werewolf. And, like, before, we were running, like, LARPs at, like, in person, where we can, like, go off of body language and stuff like that, or doing it around a table and stuff like that, where it's not entirely devoid of that connection, where I feel like online it's a lot harder to gauge someone's, like, vibe when you're telling them a story.
Yeah,
so it's a bit more
it definitely is kind of a unique challenge to try to gauge how everybody's feeling about every little detail I put out there. But, it just means I have to work a little harder to kind of, like, lasso them up and pull them into a little group together and get them attached. But that's been a fun little distraction from quarantine. I've also been doing some hobbying. People look up on Instagram. I've done some 3D printing and some converting to make up some Blade Guard veterans for my salamanders, as well as a big old salamandified Redemptor Dreadnought and a Space Marine medic. What do they call them?
Apothecary?
An apothecary, yeah. To get some of those guys made up. So I did a whole bunch of building on those, and last night I actually did a bunch of painting on 5 of the Blade Guard vets and the apothecary. So really trying to, like, put the hobby hammer down while I can. I get these little, like, bursts of inspiration, and I'm trying to write it for as much as I can get out of it. I got a buddy who just got his, like, he got his new Death Card book, and he's super excited to try it. So I am trying to, like, paint up a middle of the road 1,000 point salamander list as quickly as possible, and all of that stuff is for it. So I've got a pretty good start so far. I've got 10 intercessors painted. I'll then have these 5 Blade Guard vets and the apothecary painted up. I'm gonna move on to the Redemptor after this. And then I'll just have, like, a handful of models left after that, and I should be at 1,000 points, which is awesome. I think that's good inspiration. Although, John, I have a confession that I have not told you yet. I've also been naughty. I've done a bad.
Oh, what have you done?
I have done a bad, John. So, for people out there, originally, I was going to sell John my Beast Claw Raiders. I got some, and I, like, magnetized them all, and it was really very cool. I even started painting one most of the way through to look kind of like Timberwolves sort of deal, and, like, Razorback boars. And then John was going to buy them. And recently, John told me that he doesn't want to buy them anymore because he wants to focus on Beast of Chaos, and that's a good move. That's a good move. So then I was thinking about selling them to another friend, and I made the mistake of looking at the models and reading the lore, and now I'm considering just, like, taking what's left of the Beastclaw Raiders I have and painting them up and making them an army. So we'll see where I land on that. I'm sure it'll change by the day.
I mean, it's a quick force. Not to mention, like, now that they're combined with, like, the Ogre Kingdom stuff, there's a lot of play in there. Like, as a faction, they have some issues, but flavor-wise, I think it's something completely different from the other stuff you play. Because, like, your Lumineth are very, like, magic-focused and kind of, like, regimental. And your Gloomspite gets are like, I have a bazillion dudes, and then your Sylvaneth are very tricksy. Ogres are none of those things. They're pure brute force, and they have very little models, and they just eat meat and chicken nuggets. So
yeah, I think Haywo put it best. It's an army about the fundamentals, because if you make a mistake, there's nothing to get you out of it. Yeah. It's very straightforward. You know, you turn on your monster trucks and you charge in. And sometimes I kind of like that, a little simpler. Although I'm a dirty, dirty lore whore, and I cannot be made to cross, like, the Beastclaw Raiders with the Ogre Maul tribes. Like, I know the lore says, like, yeah, they totally work together, but that's not what the lore said, like, a year ago.
Yeah, but AOS lore and like 40k lore and old fantasy lore always is like adapting and changing and about how things work. And I think it makes more sense for them to be like cooperative to a degree, but also have separate cultures. Like when the time would come for them to combine for issues, they would, and that makes sense. Kind of like how Chaos does or Skaven do.
Yeah, you would think that, but actually the book goes in great detail, even in the new lore, of telling you about the civil war that they had and how awful it was for both sides and how they still hate each other to this day because the mullet maws or like gob mullets or whatever, blood maws went to battle with the boulder heads. And they still hate each other. And then immediately after telling you all that lore, they're like, yeah, but you can run them together. No, no, I must stay true to the lore. So I guess I'm just going to play like an all cavalry monster mash army, which to be honest, I don't hate it.
I mean, yeah, it's still super cool. But civil wars don't mean anything. Us here in Skaven land, we do civil wars like every Tuesday. We eat tacos and do a civil war every Tuesday.
Oh, well, some things don't reproduce like a bunny on coke. So, you know, our civil wars mean a tad more. There were a lot of nuggies that lost their lives in that fight, John. It's a big deal. But yeah, generally, that's kind of what I've been doing. So there's been a lot of hobbying going on, but still no gaming happening. I long for the day when we could give this update and I can actually talk about like tabletop war games that we have played.
Hopefully. I mean, it'll be soon because you're going to be playing that game against Death Guard here soon.
Hopefully, maybe within the next month or two. That'd be pretty great. I'd at least have something to talk about here other than tabletop games, and I'm not sure folks are too into that. Actually, for people out there listening, if you are into that, let us know. I mean, we're more than obviously very open to feedback here. And knowing what folks are into helps us kind of decide how to chat about things moving forward. All right. Moving on to the important piece of this episode. Well, important's a relative term. Nothing we talk about is important. We are here to just be a hopefully chuckle-inducing distraction for like 45 minutes of your week. I don't know if I'd say it's important. But the wink, wink, important part of the episode, John. What to do if you have a top-tier army.
Yeah. So, to start off with, we kind of are going to do the same thing we did last episode, and that is, we got to like define it. We got to tell you what we mean by it. Let's discuss what is a top tier army. And so, what I think is a top tier army is anything that you're going to see a ton about online. You're going to see it on Reddit. You're going to see it on Facebook groups, on YouTube channels, all sorts of stuff, like comment threads, where people are going to be like, this army is broken. This army is the most powerful army, or it's got this specific combo in it that makes it super good. And it's oppressive. Recently, in 8th edition, it was Space Marines towards the end there. Nowadays, in 9th edition, it's kind of flipping around all over the place, because new books are coming out all over the place. But that leads me into my second way of defining it. Whereas, like, right now, in 9th edition, you've got a lot of armies with a new 9th edition codex. It has a completely different flavor, completely different feel, a much higher power level than old 8th edition codexes. And so, with 8th edition codexes, they're underpowered. They're more like last episode. New codexes are more like this episode. And so you kind of got to take that into account to a degree. Stuff in AOS are similar, where you've got books that were updated 4 or 5 years ago,
I actually
And
don't think we have books that are that old. I think
really?
we've had a newer round of stuff. I think our oldest books are Sylvaneth and Gloomspite Gets, and I think they're only like 2 years old.
I mean, I know Beast Chaos are older than 2 years old, but
Their new book? I don't
yeah,
know. I do some Googling, but our sound guy would kick my ass, so I'm going to refrain.
yeah.
But
But our
yeah,
point is
generally,
eventually,
I think that's true. Yeah.
eventually you kind of like fall behind, and sometimes you get a new book and it's got a whole bunch of busted stuff in it.
Oh yeah, you literally could become like the strongest army in the game overnight with one book
Yeah.
release.
And like Joe was saying, that can be a great thing. It'll feel great as a player, especially if you're a competitive player. If you're a competitive player and your army is now competitively viable, that's awesome. But we're going to assume we're talking about this from a casual perspective, like at your local meta, you're playing with your buds, and you're just having good games. That's what this episode's about, because if you have a very powerful top-tier army and you play competitively, you're already set. You're doing the game the way you want to do the game. That isn't necessarily conducive to a good, casual, fun environment to play the game.
Yeah, in fact, it could be directly damaging to the casual fun environment that you might be used to and like. Yeah, I'm gonna make the same assumption that John made because, well, what are we on, episode like 13 or 14 now? We lost the competitive players like 12 episodes ago. So for us casual folks, we're generally not after just winning. We don't often play with money on the line or, these sort of tournament rankings that might matter for stuff like sponsorships or paint commissions or things like that. We're, generally speaking, the casual players playing to have fun. And that's really what most folks are looking for. If you walk into like a friendly local gaming store or people playing in a basement or a garage, they're probably just looking to have some fun and relax a little bit in their downtime. And that's a very particular environment where if you come in swinging this giant bat of a new book, very competitive army, you could really hurt the vibe. You could really ruin a weekend.
Yeah, and I'll use that to kind of move to our next topic about how does this affect you as a player. And how it affects you as a player is if you have a very powerful army, and even if you're newer to the game or if you've been playing for a while and you're playing against somebody who is not aware of how powerful your army is or is not trying to play a crunchy, hard, competitive game, you could give them a really bad time and you might get a bad reputation that people might not want to play you. Stuff like that. You can become the air quotes that guy at a game store. And not to say there's anything wrong with playing top tier armies. We're trying to explain the opposite. And there's nothing wrong with playing competitively. Me and our friend Seth, I play competitively with him with armies all the time on purpose because it's a kind of game we like playing together. But we know we like playing that together. I don't do that with someone like Joe, who likes to play casually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's about having that sort of social contract conversation before you really get into that to know if they really want you to come in tuned to the nines.
Yeah, and so when you have a top tier army, you might be getting some sort of passive aggression from other players. It happens with Space Marine players where you might, I remember when Knights first came out, right? Way back, I think it was 6th edition or 7th edition, when Knights came out. Anybody who bought and played a Knight army at the time were getting, bad looks, and people didn't want to play them because everyone saw it as super broken and not fun. But there were ways to play that army in a way that didn't break the game. It didn't make the game not fun for everyone. Yeah. Same thing with Space Marines recently. The new Mortarion rules for Death Guard the same way. The Oziark Bone Reapers back in Age of Sigmar. There's always ways to play the game differently. But the first step is recognizing if you have a very powerful list or a very, very powerful army, or maybe one of your favorite units is very powerful, and how to adjust to kind of be able to play the game with other people and not be mad.
Yeah, I could actually speak to some of that because I have been on the receiving end. So When I got into this, it was in 8th edition, so knights were kind of new, and I love big stompy robots. I do, for the love of God, I love big giant robots. So I saw these knight models, and I was so intrigued by who would pilot these things and what the lore is, and then I learned the lore, and I was even more intrigued. And I really wanted to buy and run an all-knight army. Not like a weird soup list. I wanted all knights, dang it. And I was talked out of it by a number of people, because no one would play me if I got them. And which is kind of a shame, because I had this idea in my head for this homebrew group of knights called the Onion Knights, who actually weren't trained household knight pilots. In the lore, you have a trained noble pilot would like sit in this chair, and his brain will drift with the chair, and the thoughts of all of those previous knights will kind of invade his head. And if you don't go insane, you're now a pilot. But I loved the idea of knights that went down in a battle and the pilots died, and then the local yahoos climbed in the cockpit and survived drifting with it, and now these nobodies are being guided by these long dead nobles who are teaching them how to pilot these knights. So I was going to paint them all like chrome and primer with like pieces of board covering holes and rope ladders to get up in there and really like junkify them up. But all of that lore and all of that passion, just not enough to get over the fact that I would have got a reputation as that guy if I bought this army and did all that. So I passed it up.
And I think that's kind of a shame. And if you're out there and you're playing a very powerful faction, don't quit because, like, don't stop yourself from doing something or quit playing the army because you're powerful. Have a conversation with people around you. Like, don't. And if you're one of those people who shames people for playing very powerful armies, maybe have a conversation with them. Don't do it just because they play the army. And chances are it's probably because of the behavior, not because of, like, they're playing Space Marines. Like, some people just like playing certain stuff because aesthetically it's fun for them. And I'm sure there's some sort of solution that can be found there if you work through the social contract together.
Yeah, which we'll get to in a little bit, talking about what you could do about it. But at the time, I really did, like, I was new to the game. I didn't know anything about, like, the social contract or how to work through some of this. So I turned it down. When honestly, looking back, I could probably, right now, I could buy a full Knights army. I'd get my ass whooped.
All right, the new plan for this episode is to convince Joe to start a Knights army by the end of this.
Don't start with me, Jonathan. Do not start with me! We'll see. But yeah, like, there are ways around it, and I definitely would never want anyone to be turned away from whatever army they're super into just because it's really powerful right now. Because let me go ahead and tell you, that power is temporary. Like, it's not going to stay forever. New books are going to drop. Everything else is going to get way better, and you're going to go back down to the middle, just where you want to be in a little bit of time. You really just kind of have to have some coping strategies on how to ride it out in the meantime, which I think is the important part. Like, how do you actually compensate for having this? So I think the first, as John and I have kind of alluded to, is you might want to tone down your lists a little if you're playing a really strong army in a casual environment. Intentionally so. If your army has a couple of units that are really, really just pulling their weight above what they should be, maybe don't bring those, or don't bring very many of them. Or, maybe leave out a few combos. But that might help your force to feel a little less painful when someone plays against you.
Yeah, like, generally, when an army's super busted, you can kind of look online and see, like, if you've noticed something's really strong and you've made a combo, it's probably online as well. And when you figure out how these things work, you can take pieces of those combos away to make something that's really fun, that you like, playable at a lower tier with people. And so maybe taking away that support character or that spell or that thing so that you can play the stuff you want to play is very, very efficient for being able to actually play the game with people. and that kind of leads me to look up why it's broken. Like try to find out why this army is dominating. Why is it doing so well? And how can you counteract that? Or maybe look at it like an opportunity. Like if you're playing a very powerful faction that's got just general overall really good rules, maybe use that as an opportunity to take some of the lesser efficient things in the book and bring them.
Yep.
Make some stuff that you really like that's kind of janky. Bring it, and it'll be functional. It'll work, but it'll be more fun. Like it'll be kind of a playing around, kind of deal.
And I've felt this one myself. So my bud Jake, who is a Death Guard player, he's the one I was talking about earlier. He also is really into Aussie Arc Bone Reapers, and when the models were revealed, long before even a single rule was talked about on the Wind, he was super into Aussie Arc Bone Reapers. He really wanted this army. And, he put it as pre-order for, like, the box release and got a whole bunch of stuff ordered. And then the army turned out to be very strong. Very, very, very strong. In particular, one sub-faction was very strong. Because the way Age of Sigmar works is oftentimes you will get an army and it is Aussie Arc Bone Reapers. But then you get to pick a very specific sub-faction that gives your army extra rules. So, in that instance, his rules for that sub-faction, for one of the sub-factions, were very strong. Very, very strong, with very few weaknesses. And playing against it in our casual group, there was nothing to be done about it. Absolutely nothing to be done about it. So, in kind of understanding that the problem was largely rooted in that one sub-faction, he just didn't play that sub-faction. He picked a different one that he thought was also cool and then made that one work. And sure enough, his army went from like incredibly unbeatable. Well, I shouldn't say unbeatable. One of our friends also played Tzeentch, and then the new Tzeentch book came out, which was even more busted than the Aussie Arc Bone Reapers army. You people who play AOS, you know what I'm talking about. But for us peasants without the new books, when he switched off from that sub-faction, his army was just then very good, but playable. Like, we have a chance. There are weaknesses to exploit. We could all still have fun. And all that took was a conversation and him kind of Googling around to go, oh, so it's pretty much all tied to this one thing. And sure enough, still playing Aussie Arc Bone Reapers even now. Yeah. And it would be a shame if we didn't do that, and instead just kind of like boo-hooed him until he sold the Force. Like, that would suck.
Yeah, like that's not a lot of fun. And that brings me to another point is, like, have a conversation with your playgroup. If you're playing something broken, like say you want to bring Mortarion, and right now Mortarion's crazy, and he's super good in Death Guard, and you want to build this super cool list where you bring a bunch of Death Guard. Maybe write up a narrative scenario with the guys that you're going to play with, and write it in a way where you kind of handicap yourself because you're bringing a very powerful model with a very powerful list, and maybe they don't have the answers to it, and kind of change things up. Like, make it a narrative-focused game so you can play with the stuff you want to play with. Like, I play Beasts of Chaos, right, for AOS. For anyone who knows about Beasts of Chaos, they're not in a great place. They're probably one of the worst books.
Yeah, sadly.
And so I'm never going to go to a game expecting to win, but I'm going to go to a game expecting to have fun. And I think a lot of people who play the game prefer that. It isn't about winning, it's about having fun. And so take that into account. Like, try to create a fun environment to play with other people, with your list and with their bringing, and don't come at it from a sense of like, well, you lowly peasants without your fancy codex. Like, have a serious conversation with them. Be like, I just want to make sure you're going to have fun in this game. Like, I don't want you to feel like the rules are making this game unfun for you. And alternatively, if that doesn't necessarily work for you, that doesn't like get you motivated, find a friend. Like, I have a friend, Seth, where I know that I can go to Seth and be like, I want to play a busted competitive game where we're going to kind of glare at each other from across the table for like 3 hours. And we can do that. You know, I've got a friend who I will play very tough competitive style games with. And you can find that too. Like you can do that for playing that big, powerful list if you really need to like get those models on the table and roll those dice in a competitive way. You can do that.
Yeah, and I think especially in terms of like having a conversation, it will help with one of the things John mentioned earlier that could become a problem if you're playing one of these like boogeymen armies, as I would call them. As he said, you might end up with a reputation for being that guy if you aren't careful. And one of the ways you could do that is to have that conversation. It's going to help you to not come off as a jerk, but instead as somebody who just really likes an army that happens to be good. And that will help with that reputation. And also another very important point to preserve that like good reputation is to be aware of your rules. Because if you're playing a boogeyman army and you accidentally overplay something or overreach something, it will not look good.
Yeah, if you like accidentally re-roll everything when you're only supposed to re-roll once because you misread a rule, and they know your faction's broken, and they hear that like, well, wow, you get to do just everything. Like, people might get frustrated by that, and that's okay for them to get frustrated. But if it was genuinely a mistake, it's genuinely a mistake.
Mm-hmm. And
if you know ahead of time, you can prevent those kinds of situations. And if you make a mistake like that in the middle of a game, whether you're a broken army or not a broken army, you can, these aren't tournaments. You can go back and fix it. You can just go, oh, my bad, I'll just re-roll that whole shooting.
Yeah, I cannot think of a time where John and I haven't been able to just like rewind the clock and make something right.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to do. You can generally do it. If it's too far in the game, you're like, man, I just realized this thing happened and it would drastically change the game. Well, then have a conversation with them about like, hey man, I totally messed up. That's my bad. Can't really go back. How can we rectify this? You know, we've done that before. Very rarely. It was a one-time thing where like I forgot a rule and like we were 2 turns later and it would have drastically changed the game in like your favor. Like I had accidentally screwed you over. I was like, yeah, I super messed up there. I'm just gonna go ahead and take this unit off the table. Does that feel more fair to you? And you were like, yeah, that works.
Yeah, I think it was when we were playing early 8th. You thought that something re-rolled all wounds instead of like re-roll ones. And you know, it was a thing when we had gone long ways ahead and just kept playing, but it wasn't a big deal because again, money's not on the line. It's okay. We're here having an agreement between gentle folk. You just work it out. And I think normally that's not too hard for players, like casual folks are used to it, but sometimes if you're playing a boogeyman army, people are less patient. So, you know, you just got to do your studying beforehand.
Yeah, and another thing is don't gotcha your opponent.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Explain what your stuff does, even if they're doing their moves. Like if you're playing with your buddy and you say your buddy is moving all of his units to shoot a knight at a very specific, like all they want to gun down one knight, and they don't know that you have rotate ion shields as a stratagem. Maybe let them know, I have rotate ion shields as a stratagem, and that might kind of mess with your plan. That might make what you're doing not exactly what you want to do. Letting them know that will let them have the information to make better decisions, to make sure they can do something. It also gets you good points if you're playing a very powerful faction and you're very open and clear with what you can and cannot do. It just makes for a better game.
It makes you look like a good person. Because there are a lot of things you could do that really could bone your opponent over that they didn't even know you could do, because it is a rule that goes against the normal rules of the game. You know, you might be able to countercharge them in their charge phase before they get to charge. And if they don't know that's a thing, well, you might just wreck them in their turn on their charge phase.
Yeah, and that's like moments like those are very jarring, and that's where people get bad feelings. That's where people like get resentment. That's where people like, oh, well, that guy screwed me over. And then they'll judge that whole faction for it. It's happened so much with Tau. Like, Tau is an example of a faction that used to be very, very powerful. In 6th edition, 7th edition, 8th edition, they were all strong at different points. And the mechanics that they played with competitively were not fun to play against or with most of the time. And so when people played those lists or those things, people didn't have a fun time. So they just kind of attributed all Tau players to being these win-at-all-costs bad guys. All of them are going to drone spam with their riptides. All of them are going to bring this like unshootable castle, like unmovable just wall of drones. Well, no. And because people didn't actively do something about preventing that, a lot of people are out there with like, I'll never play Tau again. Like, I'll never play against a Tau again. And that kind of sucks.
That does suck.
So maybe don't contribute to that problem.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it is, as I have said before on the podcast, there's a saying that you got to get your own house in order first. And if you are playing a faction, you have to try to be a good ambassador for that faction, because it's your faction. And I think that's, it's good for all of us. But even if, we give you all this advice, and all of these options that you could put forward, and all of these ways you could kind of compensate for your force becoming very, very strong. Maybe because you got a couple of new units, maybe because you got a new book. But for whatever reason, your army is just really strong. And you, despite everything else you're doing, you just cannot play it in your casual group without ruining everybody's day. There is the nuclear option. It's the same nuclear option as we talked about in the last episode with the low-tier army. You can always just wait it out.
Yeah, you can just wait to see what happens with your rules. Eventually editions change, other books come out, other people gets updates. You can play the faction later. I've seen it happen with stuff in 9th. There's guys who are ready to play stuff like Blood Angels or Space Wolves or Dark Angels, but the only people they can play against are like a Dark Eldar player, a Tyranid player, a Tau player, a Genestealer Cults player, okay, an Imperial Guard player. Okay, well, those codexes kind of don't stand up to these other ones on a fun level. Like, competitively, there might be some options, but, I mean, let's be honest, casual games, people are going to bring tuned up stuff. They're going to struggle a little bit. And so they're just going to wait. They're going to play another force. They're going to maybe start a new game. Maybe start a Crusade campaign with a new bunch of dudes they want to play.
Yeah. As we kind of mentioned earlier, these books are not eternal. Games Workshop makes a lot of money selling new books. So it behooves them to keep publishing new books.
Yeah.
And that means that in time, the current one is going to disappear.
And if something's like super broken, or if it's very like gamey, like it's non-intentionally broken, like a combo or something, most of the time an FAQ is going to come out pretty soon to fix it anyways, or tone it down to some degree. So,
yeah, if you're kind of looking at a rule and you're like, does that work that way? And you think it probably shouldn't work that way, but it might. It probably shouldn't work that way, and an FAQ will likely close that hole eventually.
Yeah, that's generally how it goes down.
But, there's no shame if you want to, put them on the shelf for a little while and wait for things to cool off. I ain't going to shame you for it. You do what you got to do, especially if you got a second faction to keep playing. No shame in it. Because right now, this is sort of at least for 40k players, it is a time of haves and have-nots.
It's a very strange time.
Yeah, and it kind of, it stings a little. It ain't good. It really, I said it in the last episode, but it's kind of the thing I dislike the most about this hobby is that, man, it is very, very top tier, very, very low tier when they're putting out new books like this. But I hope that in the near future, we will get to a day where we aren't having this conversation with the same level of difference between the top and bottom tier armies.
It'll likely even out a lot more. We'll see. I think it's also partially a problem with just the way people are playing games nowadays as opposed to back when. So I remember playing this game when there wasn't like a ton of YouTube videos about it. There wasn't Twitch streams of games. There wasn't like an online database of every list that's ever been taken in a tournament. I remember you might be lucky to find something on like a Daka forum about a list someone took in like Las Vegas. And it's a lot different now. It's a lot more visible. There's a lot more people talking about it. So it kind of makes the game gravitate towards certain things. The meta is a lot easier to figure out. It's a lot different than before, where you could kind of just take whatever and your buddy might be like, whoa, I didn't realize that could do that. That's much less likely now. Everyone kind of knows generally what everything else does.
Yeah, at least an idea of it. And as these books keep coming out, you're going to see some similarities between them, and it's just going to help to smooth things over. And eventually, the army you sidelined is probably going to come back out to where you can play it.
Yeah. Or, maybe you sideline the army long enough for your buddy to also get a busted codex, and you two can just play busted codexes against one another and see who's, the more powerful one and cackle evilly.
Now, that's the good stuff. That's like 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
I can't wait for the day. Tyranids versus World Eaters, John. It's coming.
It'll be amazing.
It's going to be Thunderdome.
Don't you take this from me. GW, give me a World Eaters Codex. If you're listening, I know you're not. I'm hoping you are, because I really want a World Eaters Codex.
And I like bugs. Give me a good Tyranid Codex, please. I beg of thee.
Watch, the new Tyranid Codex is going to come out. It's going to be super good, but all of the big bugs will be completely garbage, and you'll be real mad.
I will cry. I will weep giant manly tears.
Well, the good news is that if they destroy all your big bugs, and you can't play big bugs, you could play big robots. John,
don't you start with me.
Hey, listen, all I'm saying is that by the end of the episode, I wanted to get you to sign on to making an Imperial Knights army. So you need big robots.
It's going to take more than one recording session of peer pressure, John. It's going to take public media peer pressure to make me do that big of a project.
Well, you heard that, everybody. You need to bully Joe into buying an Imperial Knights army.
And if you want to bully me, you can find us on social media.
What a segue. Look at you. You're a professional.
I'm a pro podcaster. Some may say I'm an influencer.
No one says that.
That's true. Literally nobody has said that. I made that joke to my lady, I think last week, and the eye roll damn near killed me, y'all. It's a miracle that I am here to record this. But yeah, again, as we have to plug it, as we've been told it helps, we are on social media. I'm really active on the Instagram with hobby progress and updates. John is over there working on tweeting and tweeters and twits. And
I
also,
like the way you said that. I don't like any of the way you said that.
I don't internet, John. Don't you come at me. And also TikTok. That's a thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how I want to do this. It's a very interesting concept.
I want to do 1 minute lore videos. That's where I'm at. That's what I'm feeling.
I think that'll be pretty good. That'd be great.
But also, for people out there listening in podcast land, if you could leave a review of the podcast, it seems like that helps a whole lot, and we'd appreciate it. When we're just a podcast this small, any little bit helps, so we'd really appreciate any help that you can give us to get over that line.
Yeah, we're trying to get more people to come and listen to this and enjoy this, and hopefully we can make content that they like. If they don't want to listen to the podcast, they can come read our tweets or look at our Instagram posts or watch our TikToks. We've talked about maybe in the future doing some streaming of some degree, with games adjacent to this hobby, or just us talking or painting or whatever, if people are into that. It's something we can do as well. We're kind of open to doing whatever if you want to see it and hear it.
Yeah, anything that's community-based and kind of keeps people, keeps the hobby fires burning, we're down to help out for. And in the meantime, we're going to keep working on new episodes and new ideas to try to keep the content coming out for all of you guys. But I think for now, that's all we had planned for this episode. But don't you worry, we have a couple of really fun episodes coming up on the docket. and we'll get to record them as soon as we can. But for now, that's been all of our opinions. Bona fide, Kentucky Fried. We'll see y'all next time.